of our job. And in order to do the better job, we need to do research in this area. And our speaker today is a renowned scholar in academic writing, academic discourse, Professor Hyland. And he's a director and the chair professor of applied linguistics of Hong Kong University. And he's also the foundation fellow of the Hong Kong Academy of the Humanities. Professor Hyland is the author of over 180 articles and the author or co-author of 20 books. So I'm sure his speech will be very informative. So let's welcome him.
Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay, great, thanks. It's good to be here. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks to Emma for the invitation. It's quite a privilege to be speaking at Shanghai Jiao Tong. This university was famous for its work in corpus linguistics long before most people had heard of computers. So it's a very good experience to be here. I'm going to talk about community and identity and argue that corpus analysis is a productive way of looking at both of these things. Interviewing is important. We need to get at what people believe they're doing. But as linguists, we know that there's a lot of information in text about intentions, about relationships, and about interaction. That's what I'm going to be talking about. A corpus is important in the study of genre because it offers evidence of how language is typically used in a given context. So in corpora, we see the expression of routine community practices. It's the repeated patterns of language, the way that we use language again and again, that reveal actors' preferences about using language, and so realize and construct communities and the individuals that work in those communities. That's my basic argument. So focusing on community genres gives us access to the everyday context of academic settings, and it helps us to understand something of the practices and norms of particular communities, and to see how participants represent themselves using these community-situated genres. So I'm looking at two of the most contested concepts in the social sciences, community and individual and identity. Let's begin with community. This is a troubled concept. Not everybody agrees what it is. But we can see it as a shorthand for the practices and discourses routinely used by a particular group. Now, the idea of community is particularly disputed when we think about disciplines. This is a concept which is attacked by postmodernism and institutional changes like modular degrees and practice-based degrees like nursing and business studies. Like most communities, disciplines change constantly. So new disciplines like biotechnology and gerontology spring up at the intersection of existing disciplines and achieve international recognition. Others, like philology, astrology, decline and disappear. So I think instability is inevitable. It's a part of any community. And especially where the community is the kind of sum of the conversations that are going on between its members, like discipline. Discipline then is a term that helps us join writers, readers, and text together. It provides the context within which we learn to communicate and to interpret each other's talk. So genres are very important in this context because they're the institutionally recognised ways of producing agreement. They're the oil which keep the disciplines going. And that's what I'm going to be looking at. Now all this is a bit abstract, so I'm going to ransack some of my earlier work for examples of how genres realise disciplines. Hedges. Every time I give a presentation, I think I'm never going to mention the word hedges again. This was been a big part of my life for as long as I can remember. But I think we can see how hedges index their context. Hedges are devices that withhold complete commitment to a proposition. They imply that a statement is based on the writer's plausible reasoning rather than certain knowledge. They indicate the kind of degree of confidence a writer thinks it's wise to give a claim, while opening up a space to allow readers to dispute interpretations. Now, because they represent the writer's direct involvement in a text, they're twice as common in the humanities and social sciences as they are in the hard sciences. So we find more statements like this. It seems sensible to assume. They were probably not unreflected. We believe it might have been better. So the fact that there's less control of variables, more diversity of research outcomes, fewer clear bases for accepting claims in the social sciences than in the sciences, means that writers can't report research with the same confidence of shared assumptions. Papers rely far more on recognising alternative voices, and arguments have to be expressed more cautiously using more hedges. In the hard sciences, positivist epistemologies mean that the authority of the individual is subordinated to the authority of the text. Facts are supposed to speak for themselves. So writers disguise their interpretive activities behind linguistic objectivity. They downplay their personal role to suggest that the results will be the same whoever conducted the research. It's not supposed to be important who did the experiment. Less frequent use of hedges is one way of minimising the researcher's role. But when scientists hedge, they typically use modals rather than cognitive verbs. So again, this reduces the presence of the writer, the activity, the agency of the author. So scientists tend to be concerned with generalizations rather than individuals. So a greater weight is put on the methods, the procedures, the equipment used, rather than on the argument. So claims for the originality of research have to be balanced against what your readers are likely to accept, and taking into account the likely objections, background knowledge, rhetorical expectations of readers. Modals then are one way of helping scientists to reinforce a view of science as being an impersonal, inductive activity. It allows scientists to see themselves as discovering the truth rather than as constructing it through language. Another way that a feature which displays a disciplinary context is in the research article are directives. So directives instruct the reader to act or to see things in a certain way, and they're usually expressed through imperatives like consider, note, imagine, and obligation modals like must, have to, and should, so on. Now we can see these as directing readers to three main kinds of activity. We get textual acts, which tell readers to look at another part of the text or to another text altogether. There are physical directives, which direct readers how to carry out some action in the real world, usually in the lab. And then there are cognitive acts, which instruct readers how to interpret an argument, explicitly positioning them by telling them to note, recognize, consider some argument in the text. Now, directives are an intervention by the writer in a text. They're directly talking to the reader. And we usually find that far more in, as I say, the humanities and social sciences. But directives are a risky tactic because you're telling the reader to see things in a certain way. So as a result, most directives are in the soft fields were textual. In the humanities and social sciences, directives really just direct people to the reader to a reference or a table. Argument in the hard knowledge fields is very different. It's formulated in a highly standardized code. Succinctness is very highly valued by editors who get a substantial number of submissions, and valued by readers who in the sciences are suffering from information overload. So directives help writers cut to the heart of technical arguments. So we find a high proportion of cognitive directives in the hard sciences, telling readers what they should attend to or leading them through an argument. The last feature of academic genres I want to mention are bundles, or frequently occurring word sequences. Essentially, these are a key way of shaping text meanings and contributing to our sense of distinctiveness and naturalness in a register. So collocations like, as a result of, it should be noted that, if you see that, you're probably pretty sure you're looking at an academic text. Whereas if you see in pursuance of, in accordance with, you're likely to be looking at a legal text. Now, looking at a corpus of 120 articles and 120 dissertations, MA and PhD dissertations in 4 disciplines, I found that the most common bundles in academic writing are, on the other hand, at the same time, as well as. So, kind of, we've got a love in academic writing for a sort of watery, non-committal kind of language. But there is considerable variation across the disciplines. So, of the 4 disciplines in the corpus, the electrical engineers were far more dependent on bundles. They used far more bundles, more variation in bundles, and it took up a higher percentage of their text. I'm not really sure why it is, but I think it might be because technical communication is relatively abstract and graphical, and language constructs an argument by linking data or text findings together in routinely patterned ways. They use a lot of the same formula to construct their arguments. There's also a lot of differences in the forms of bundles, or 4-word bundles. So over half of all items in the top 50 of each discipline don't occur in the top 50 of any other discipline. Business studies and applied linguistics share 18 items in the top 50, and these 4 don't occur in the sciences at all. And similarly, biology and electrical engineering have 16 in common, and these don't occur in the soft sciences at all. There's also disciplinary variation in the functions of these different bundles, with a broad split between research-oriented bundles. About half of all bundles in the sciences refer to real-world activities, whereas about half of all bundles in applied linguistics and business studies refer to the text itself. And participant-oriented bundles, which refer to the writer or the reader of the text, are about twice as common in soft disciplines. So these uses are not just random, they reflect argument patterns in the two domains. These are text-oriented bundles, and as I say, these are much more common in social sciences. They largely connect aspects of argument. These are research-oriented bundles, much more common in the sciences, and they convey the grounded, experimental basis of work in the hard sciences. Participant bundles are usually imply the presence of the writer or reader. They express a stance and the modality of statements, and they're twice as common in the soft sciences. So it's clear that writers in different disciplines represent themselves, their readers, and their content in very different ways, with those in the humanities and social sciences taking a far more explicitly personal view. Now, these rhetorical practices of each discipline don't just reflect characteristics of the discipline, a disciplinary epistemology, but they help construct that epistemology. There's never any neutral reporting of results and findings or ideas, but only community-situated ones. So being an engineer or being an applied linguist means talking like one, means writing like one. Otherwise, you're not part of the family. Now, because corpora allow us to focus on community practices in negotiating meaning, they also tell us something about how writers understand their communities. So when we see writers doing the same thing again and again and again, constructing their communities, they're doing this for a reason. They recognize that readers are likely, they know what their readers are likely to find convincing and persuasive. So these repeated rhetorical decisions don't just construct communities, they also construct individuals, the people that are writing in those communities. Now, Benwell and Stoker tell us that identity is the way that people display who they are to each other. So it doesn't exist within individuals. Identity is not something inside us. It's something that exists within relationships, between individuals, not within them. This is identity as performance. The performance of a speaker or writer, what we do through the text we engage in and the linguistic choices we make. So identity is something we create through the ways that we participate in our everyday discourses. So it might be a performance and subject to change, but it's a performance that's re-inscribed in us. Every time we write something, every time we say something in our discipline, it reinforces our preference, our commitment to that way of communicating. And it strengthens our claim to be an applied linguist or an engineer. So our discourse comprises dispositions to behave in certain ways, to make particular discourse choices in routine situations. Now, of course, Getting an academic reputation means saying something new. We've got to be original. But it means saying something new in familiar ways, in ways that our readers are going to recognise and understand and find convincing. So effective argument means employing the community's collaborative practices. And this is why academic discourse is often seen as crushing users into conformity. You have to write like this. But the conventions are also enabling, because they are options which allow writers to engage in a community and perform an identity. It's the way that we show who we are. So while academic writing or academic genres restrict behaviour, they don't exclude agency. So in other words, identity is what makes us similar to each other and what makes us different. For academics is how they both achieve credibility as insiders and reputations as individuals. So obviously we're all different, with different ages, genders, nationalities, first languages and so on. All of these things influence how we make sense of our disciplines and how we interact with colleagues. When acting as academics, however, we're acting in a circumscribed context which gives meanings to our choices, our discourse choices. We understand each other's talk in the context of this interpretive community. Now we can see something of this in two genres where the assertion of self-representation is most explicit. I'm going to talk a little bit about academic homepages and academic bios. Identity partly involves identification. It means identifying ourselves as belonging to a particular group by taking on its discourses and understandings. So what we do when we create a homepage, have you got a homepage? What we do when we create a homepage is present a self by selecting ideas and materials that are likely to be valued by a particular group. At the same time, we want to be seen as an individual within that group. So there's always a dilemma. So for academics, the personal homepage is an identity claim. We're trying to say who we are to people. But there are tensions here because we're not just academics, we're also other things as well. And our online identities can be hijacked to project a positive view of our university. This is what Thoms and Thelwell said about this a few years ago. The institution constructs academics in the model that is ideologically suited to promote the institution. So your university homepage is not about you, it's about the university. Academics are denying any autonomous subjectivity construction and yield to the constructed display of items in the university electronic window. Now, to get some control back over their self-representation, many academics create their own homepage. So I compared the differences in two versions of this genre. So I looked at 100 academic homepages in philosophy and physics, 50 university pages and 50 personal pages by the same authors. I also took equal numbers of full professors and assistant professors, and between men and women from each discipline, to see if they were, how they did it. Obviously, visual representation is important in constructing an identity in homepages. The most striking feature of the university staff pages is their glossy uniformity. They look great. Design, format, colour, images are determined by the institution and duplicated for every member in the department. So this repetition imposes a university branding on academics. So these two academics are located in different disciplines, different universities, different countries, but they have a similar grid structure and narrow colour range. The pages are dominated by banner headings carrying institutional logos and department and university names, and by sidebars which carry information about the department. So these symbols these features act as symbols of ownership, which position the individual as an employee. So following left to right reading conventions, the text on the left is scanned first. It's the given of the text, providing a context in which we read the author himself. The institutional context is the point of departure for the representation of the academic's identity. So squeezed into the remaining space, subjects are presented through a brief paragraph, contact details, publications, and a photograph. This is usually tightly cropped passport-type photograph, which minimises background context and disconnects the individual from time and the place. So they become a generic academic, filling a vacant place on the page. And as I say, when it's repeated across an entire department, these features construct the subject as just one academic among many. It removes individuality. Hyperlinks are also important in constructing an identity. Who we publicly connect with says something about our interests, our commitments, and how we want to be seen. Now, unsurprisingly, these pages are dominated by institutional links. Going back to the two pages I looked at earlier, both Berg and Martin have 21 links on their home pages, but only 3 of those links are about themselves. The rest are about university. Over the whole corpus, there were 700 links, and just 11% were to individual subjects. Now, because of this, individuals create their own personal pages. They're trying to reclaim some control over their identity representation. Visually, these are generally more homespun, more do-it-yourself, avoiding the uniformity, the glossiness of the institutional pages. So they convey a kind of integrity through DIY minimalism. Now, one way authors personalise their home pages is through far more photographs and more varied photographs, 5 times more pictures on the personal pages. Subjects were often shown in some leisure activity. 80% of the pictures didn't have a picture of the author at all. They were pictures of children, partners, pets, landscapes, and collections of fluffy toys. So these reveal the writer as someone with a life outside the university. This is someone with individuality. So the visual doesn't just embellish the text. It's not just about verbal language. It's playing a central role in presenting the self. Links are also different on personal pages, contributing to a more individual identity. When given a choice, authors reduce links to their institutions and department. I don't know if you can see this. The second bar is the department links, and the red one is the personal page. Far, far less about the department and less about the university, the first one. But their publications links shoot up, and also links to their discipline. So writers are trying to showcase themselves rather than their institutions. However, when we look at the ways that authors describe themselves, there were far greater similarities to the university pages. So 80% of the pages mentioned jobs, research and publications. Only 11 gave any personal information at all. Now for some, the personal page was an attempt to present an academic self more creatively. This is Ian Howard's personal page. He's a physicist at University College London. Now, he begins by constructing himself predominantly as an academic. So the first link is about, takes you to his university page. The second couple of links are to his research groups. But the photograph of the chimp, the tongue-in-cheek mention of hometown celebrities of his football team, and the mention of dweeb pastimes like bird watching and so forth, constructs a richer and more humorous individual than the university poster boy. But despite some idiosyncratic designs and research links, most subjects linked their self-representation to an academic profile. So what does it matter? Who cares? Well, what's lost? Well, academics don't have to say anything more about themselves than they do already. But when you're participating in an online genre, like a website, there are strong expectations of personal disclosure. Think of Twitter. So what's missing is often any sense of an author's individuality. So by creating a homepage, which is essentially of an academic, you're suggesting that this kind of bland academic might be all there is. The academic bio is another opportunity for academics to present a scholarly identity most explicitly. So it's a genre where in 50 to 100 words, academics can craft a narrative of expertise for themselves. It's particularly interesting because it sits in stark contrast to the article itself that it accompanies. So the article has been stripped of all identifying information for blind review. Another reason the academic bio is interesting is unlike the familiar narrative interview, it does not produce self-conscious talk in a formal and low-stakes context. It provides an authentic way of getting at self-representation. So this is where individuals stake a claim for a particular version of themselves, and so they indicate what writers see as important to their discipline, their community. Now my corpus here was 600 bios, 200 in each of applied linguistics, electrical engineering and philosophy. I also controlled for gender with 100 men and women in each discipline, and used 4 categories, from senior academics through assistant professors to grad students, technical managerial. And in my analysis I looked at what people said about themselves and how they said it. So first of all, what do they talk about in bios? Well, the table shows that virtually everyone mentioned employment, and together with research interests, this comprised over half of all the statements about self in the corpus. Now for junior academics, this is often all they've got to say about themselves, but professors have a greater range of things to talk about in constructing a bio. And we find an upward curve in the mention of research, employment, publications and achievement as we go up the status ladder. Gender seems relatively unimportant in how academics construct their bios. What men and women said about themselves was pretty similar. Once again, discipline was the most significant influence in what writers included. The biggest disciplinary difference was the weight that engineers give to education. So for them, this was typically linked to their area of study, demonstrating a particular expertise. So this reflects, I think, a hard science apprenticeship model, where the education of PhDs is also an opportunity to publish as a team. So education is very important to engineers. Strangely, we also find engineers giving more personal information. So almost all the engineers mention their birthplace. I don't know why. And some even gave their birthday as well. Now, in contrast, applied linguists stress their research interests, making a claim for credibility through their research expertise. So these made up about a third of all the claims about the self in the applied linguistics bios. Philosophers, on the other hand, parade their publications. Generally, these are monographs. They take much longer to write. There's a greater investment of time than the more multiply authored science papers. So perhaps their publications are more important. But identity is not only expressed in terms of what we talk about, but how we talk about it. One way of getting at identity is to borrow from systemic linguistics and focus on verbs. Now, SFL recognizes a distinction, a primary distinction between mental and material processes. So mental processes are verbs like relating to sensing, like think, believe, feel. Material processes are concerned with doing, work, write, study. Relational processes express being. Now, these choices are important for identity performance. For example, she is interested in is a mental process. It constructs the writer as an active thinking being, exercising choice in research interests. Whereas her research interests is a relational process. It downplays the author's role to highlight what belongs to her. So, acting in the world in some way, a material process, represents greater visibility than subjectively interpreting it with a mental process. If we look at the process types, we find that overall writers use relational and material processes in 95% of all clauses, stressing what they are and what they do. Now, this is because bios have something to say about who the author is, or rather how the author wants to be seen. Interestingly, the table also shows that relational forms increased with rank and material forms decreased with rank. So there's a shift from seeing our activities as something we do to something we are as we go through our careers, which is extremely scary. Relational clauses present identity claims because they construe being, and relational processes are mainly intensive. And they're also strengthened by using identifying over attributed choices. So professors particularly used identifying relational clauses. These choices give a definiteness and a uniqueness to what's being claimed. They identify the writer by signalling this is an important part of who the person is. I looked at the bios in the conference booklet, and this is borne out. The professors, except one, uses an identifying clause. Assistant professors and the bios of students and support staff, in contrast, use attributive options to signal class membership rather than uniqueness. So status has some impact on how writers are presenting themselves, their identity. But again, it isn't status or gender, but discipline that is the key difference. Applied linguists often use mental types, representing themselves as thinking academics rather than as intellectual workers grinding out a quota of papers every year. A distinctive intellectual identity. Engineers, in contrast, used more verbal forms, presenting themselves as arguers and talkers, highlighting their agency as an active scholar. The biggest variations were in philosophers, who used identifying relational clauses twice as frequently as linguists and 4 times more than engineers. So explicitly naming yourself as something is a key to identity. And this perhaps reflects the more individualistic ethos in philosophy, where research represents the creative insights of an individual rather than the teamwork of a group, a lab in science, for example. So while bios seem a kind of standardized genre with a limited range of options, they're cross-cut by rank, by gender, and by discipline. So these apparently bland descriptions help show that identities are constructed out of the rhetorical options that community makes available. So we gain credibility as members and approval for our performances by positioning ourselves in relation to others. But by using the discourse of a community, we're both positioning ourselves to others and being positioned by those discourses. So there's a tension, because identity involves both using the shared norms of the community, but also it positions us. But not all positionings are the same. I just want to explore this very briefly for the last few minutes I've got, by comparing the work of 2 well-known applied linguists, Debbie Cameron and John Swales, and comparing their work with the mainstream. First of all, briefly, Debbie Cameron. I don't know if you know Deborah Cameron. She's a very well-known radical linguist, known for her work on verbal hygiene, on language of gender, and she has a very distinctive, confident and assertive style. And one of the ways that she conveys this confident, assertive style is through a significantly above average use of is, which is the 5th most keyword in her corpus. So compared with a much larger applied linguistics corpus, is massively significantly more frequent. And this collates most frequently with it is, and particularly in the form it is plus adjective plus to infinitive, which occurs 161 times. So we get a lot of statements like this. So thematic it, introducing an embedded clause as subject, asserts the writer's opinion and tries to drag the reader into that opinion. It's a directed strategy, grabs the reader and takes them along with where the writer's going. So this assertiveness in Cameron's authorial positioning is also expressed through the co-occurrence of it with that. Now it and that occur 250 times, and this is what Polysay and I have called evaluative that, and it works to thematize the writer's evaluation of the content that follows. It has my own view that what does not change is my conviction. In this context, this is problematic fact. So it's a powerful way of projecting ideas, because it makes the writer's attitude starting point of the message and the perspective from which we interpret what follows. So while Cameron very rarely uses the first person, we're left in no doubt about what her position is. Another way that Cameron uses community resources to construct a distinctive identity is through rebuttal and counter-argument. So not occurs 900 times. manuscripts, but 572, though 144. All of these are significantly more frequent in her work than in applied linguistics more generally. So, again, this is a forceful expression of ideas, but instead of claiming a position outright, it disputes alternatives. So in this example, Cameron seems to go along with the reasonable policies promoting wider access to university. But then she turns to question the underlying assumptions of this process, presenting her own position that knowledge work is really for the benefit of employers rather than the benefit of students. John Swales is another well-known applied linguist for his work on academic writing and genre. He's an altogether different character, projecting the identity of a cautious and inquiring colleague. Now, he does this through genre choices which convey very clear personal and interpersonal connection to readers. So, his frequent use of I, both I and my are in the top 10 keywords of his corpus. So, I, me and my occur 9.1 times per 1,000 words in Swales' work, which is almost twice as much as in applied linguistics more widely, and far more frequently than in research papers more generally. So we get a very strong sense of personal investment in Swales' writing. We see a writer making decisions, weighing evidence, drawing conclusions, and these examples are very typical of how he does it. Very, very distinctive style, very different from Cameron. In fact, we find the first person in Swales' work is mainly associated with mitigation and attitude. So these are the main verbs which go along with I in his work. And this reflexivity contributes to an identifiable voice, a key aspect of his identity. And a key aspect of this identity is the frequency with which self-mention is used in a self-deprecatory way. So he's often using I to put himself down, often to encourage others to do research, because even the big shots have their failures. Okay, just to sum up, I want to say that using corpora to study academic genres shows how we choose our words to connect with others, to present our ideas in ways that make most sense to them. So by revealing the ways that disciplines privilege certain ways of saying things, certain ways of making meanings, corpora reveal how language helps to perpetuate the norms and thinking and conventions of disciplinary communities, and how this in turn encourages the performances of certain kinds of identity. Genres are certainly constraining because they create a context which restricts what rhetorical habits we can bring from our past experience. We can't just say anything when we sit down to write an academic text. We select from the options that are available. But genres are the ways that we relate independent beliefs to shared experience. So by using corpora to study identity in communities shows us something of how, through our repeated choices from a repertoire of options, we display ourselves as people we want to be. So that the production of genres is always the production of community and the production of ourselves. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, Professor Hyland has given this very successful presentation. Based on corpus-based analysis, he has analyzed two concepts, community and identity, and he has shown how both community and identity contribute to the production of academic texts. Now we have the 10 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, happy to do that.
Okay, any questions, comments? Yes, please.
Yes, you made a strong link between angles and rhetorical strategies and so on to the discipline. Now, I was thinking you're an applied linguist, despite the variety.
Doesn't put it on, please.
Hello? No.
No.
Hello?
By the other one?
I thought I was talking. Anyway. Hello? Can you hear me?
From the mic.
Like to use this?
I don't want to be so exposed. Anyway, the question is, you made a strong link in your talk between these rhetorical structures and bundles and so on with particular disciplines, right? And you brought these examples of Swales and Cameron and how widely they differ. And I was thinking of one of the main traits of the discipline of applied linguistics is that it is actually interdisciplinary, right? So there is a great variety between different parts of applied linguistics, psycholinguists and sociolinguists, educational linguists, corpus linguists, and so on. So wouldn't it be very difficult to sort of state that this is a particular discipline? It's different from philosophy and biology and so on. This is my first question. I have a second one.
I'll answer that one first. Well, I'll answer it, I'll respond to it. I'm not sure if I can answer it. Okay, I started off by saying that discipline is a troubled term, and it's true. I mean, how far do we break down our divisions? I think I selected my corpora focusing really on what I see as a kind of broad-based mainstream applied linguistics, the journals that I chose. So I wasn't going for specialist areas of applied linguistics. I think you probably are right. I mean, but when we go further, you know, we can break our corpora down to, as I did at the end, towards idiolects. You know, we're all different, but we have to look for commonalities, similarities somewhere, and I think we find them in applied linguistics. I think it's a good, it'll be an interesting research project if anyone's looking for one. If you've got any free time, you could look at the differences between different branches of applied linguistics or linguistics. I mean, how do our sociolinguists and second language acquisition researchers talking differently? I imagine they are. And what is it that's different about them, and why are they using the language that they are to do it? But it's an empirical question. I assume that was the case, but I wouldn't want to jump to conclusions. If we get some data, then I think that'd be great. But I agree. I mean, but we've got to start somewhere when we look at communities. Thanks for your question.
I have one short question, is possible.
Yes.
This question relates to another major point in your talk, namely the role of corpora. And I've worked with corpora a lot, and I've often been asked, maybe definitely you too, about the basically static nature of the corpus, right? So how do you unite this language changes, particularly when you look at idiolects and people like Swales and Cameron, and people change. I remember, for instance, when I was a PhD student in Toronto a long time ago, we were told you can never in any work, like a PhD thesis, use I absolutely out. And a couple of years later, this changed completely, and you were allowed to say, I think, I believe, or whatever. So how do you know, once the corpus is finished, it's already outdated, or not?
Life's tough, isn't it? I mean, that's true of any kind of data collection. I mean, if you're interviewing people, it's what they think at that moment. If you're conducting questionnaires, it's what you get at that time. I am skeptical that language changes so fast. I think people talk about relaxation of conventions. That's an empirical issue that hasn't been demonstrated. I think we might feel that it's the case, that there is more use of I, but maybe we're looking at different disciplines. I mean, I think, again, if anyone out there's looking for a PhD project, a longitudinal study on the use of interactional, or informal, or impersonal, interpersonal markers will be a great project. I remember John Swales a few years ago interviewed international graduate students at Michigan and asked them what they thought about these informal elements like I, contractions, beginning a sentence with and or but, and they hated it. That they didn't like choice. They wanted conventions because they felt comfortable with them. So for many writers, and more writers are second language writers, more people getting published are second language writers, maybe acting against the increasing informality of disciplinary language. This is just a guess, I don't know. But when people say that academic language is becoming more informal, I'm not sure that that's true. And I think, of course, language is not static. It's changing all the time. But if we collect enough examples of what it is at the moment, I think that it's a fairly good representation. How far we can generalize beyond the moment, I'm not sure. So, you know, on the bus going home, you can say all this is out of date. It's all changed. Thanks for the question.
One more question, please.
Yes. I'll try to just project to get
I can hear.
I come from this from, I'm a teaching practitioner as well as being interested in research, and I've been very interested in your own research ever since I read the 2002 paper on identity in writing. And at that time I was teaching university professors here in China, and like many linguists you created a massive headache for me as I then had to deal with the ramifications of, do I teach them what the textbooks say, or do I teach them what the evolving standards are now possibly suggesting? So for us poor practitioners who are racking with this, should we teach the ideal, the Platonic ideal of academic writing, or should we try to incorporate what academic writing actually is in different genres and different circumstances?
I'm far too humble to answer that. That's a big question. I mean, I think as teachers and as writers, we're always trying to address a particular context and a particular audience. Now, I have arguments with the lingua franca people who suggest that we shouldn't be conforming to certain norms. But then when my students write papers like that for their engineering and biology professors, they get very bad grades. So, you know, it depends who are we talking to and what are the expectations of those readers. You know, your teachers are using English in particular contexts where they may, where traditional expectations may be required. I mean, that's all I can say. I know it's fluffy, but we can achieve our purposes best using language if we shape our language to what our hearers, our readers are likely to expect and understand and respect and be persuaded by. I think that's all we can do. Yeah, but thanks for your question.
Okay, thank you all. As a token of appreciation of the contribution, the hosting institution has prepared a gift. So on behalf of the